Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tom Salmons. This is year 0. Today, I have Kyle Anzalone of Conflicts of Interest. I asked Kyle to join me to talk about how the war propaganda surrounding Afghanistan affected him as a child in elementary school and how that led him down the path to being one of the really, really good anti-war voices of our time. And we not only discuss that, but then we get into what is actually happening in Afghanistan and how we look at the response of the government and what we think is coming, what we suspect, or what we fear in a lot of cases. So there's some speculation towards the end, but I just wanted to get us into a conversation about like how this propaganda, how the demonizing of the Afghan people and of Muslims in general affected him as a child. I thought that was a really interesting perspective he had, so I wanted to touch on that. As always, RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and great anarcho-capitalist. He's also a great graphic designer. He designed my podcast logo and Pete Quinones' podcast logo for Freeman Beyond the Wall. So go to RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. And buy his book, Project Manicore. It's pretty good. Thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Enjoy the show. All right. Well, I am here with one of the best foreign policy guys there is. Second only to Scott Horton, I would say. Kyle Anzalone. How's it going, man?
Well, thanks. And anytime I put on lists with Scott Horton, I appreciate it. Although there are plenty of other great libertarians on foreign policy who have, written tons of books like Ted Galen Carpenter and Dub Bandow. But I appreciate the intro.
Yeah, but they're not on the show right now. You are. So.
Right.
So, I got to be a good host, man. But I mean, I'm not gonna, say that you're better than Scott. I just couldn't justify that one.
No, we'll see. Then everybody knows you're just lying, and it doesn't make any sense. They're like, he's just blowing them up because he's on the show. But you put me second to Scott. At least people then are like, well, I only know Scott as the libertarian foreign policy guy, so hell, I'll believe this guy's in second place.
Yeah. No, but you do some really good work, and you have for quite a while. And I know whenever I do foreign policy podcasts, which I don't touch on near as much as you or Scott do, but when I do it, you always contact me, and you're like, okay, like you might want to tweak this or something like that. Typically like you're praising me, but every now and then you'll be like, I don't know about what you said here. So I appreciate that, because that keeps me on track, because I'm not focused on foreign policy all the time like y'all are.
Yeah. I mean, especially Will too, because he covers like the news every day. And so he's really like in the nitty gritty of like getting down to like, is this video from Afghanistan real or not? And all that great stuff. So that kind of thing adds so much depth to our show, is because we got Will, and he's so good at digging through and making sure that everything we're doing and saying is on the right track, or at the very least we're able to say we can't confirm it or something.
Right. And that's always appreciated, because like there are so many people that act like they're so sure of everything, and sometimes you just don't know. Like, I mean, it's okay to say I don't know when you don't know. You had relayed a story about why Afghanistan was so important to you, though, when you were on Liberty Weekly. And I would like to kind of start there, because I kind of feel like people get so caught up in the political aspect of it, they forget like how people's lives, attitudes, personalities were shaped during this time, these 20 years of war. So start off with why Afghanistan is so important to you, and what brought you to the point of covering it so in depth.
Yeah, I mean, I cover foreign policy all in depth for this reason, but I mean, certainly Afghanistan, I'm 30 going on 31 years old here. And so, for me, the first war that the US like really waged in my lifetime that I can remember, yeah, maybe we were bombing people in the 90s, but that didn't register on my radar. So after 9/11, Afghanistan was the first time that the US in my lifetime, felt like we were at war. And, very quickly, it went from, being that we're going to get the guys who did 9/11 to any Muslim is somebody, who we have to worry about potentially wanting to come to America and kill us because we're free. And, as an 11-year-old who, I didn't consume much news, and nobody was ever on TV showing a picture of any Afghan kids or anything like that. Anytime they actually talked about any Afghan people, it was always just, oh, we got to get the bad guys. You know what I mean? So you assume there are only bad people in Afghanistan, in the Muslim world in general, especially as they build towards the war with Iraq and try to shift it over. And so, as a kid, you start to hate these people. You really do, because they make you scared. I believe it was the first Super Bowl after 9/11 was the Rams and the New England Patriots. It's Tom Brady's first Super Bowl win. But I lived in St. Louis. And so I remember like orange and yellow terror alerts, a potential that the Super Bowl was going to be bombed. And so, that year they talked about possible targets being Thanksgiving football games, events during Christmas, and then the Super Bowl. And so, as an 11-year-old American boy that loved football, the terrorists were like regularly making me scared that like, my favorite football player, my favorite events, my favorite times of the year were being ruined by these people. And it was all just made up fiction. None of it was true. The way it was presented did, never made any sense to me really, but they were just like, the Muslim people are bad. And then whenever, they, somebody who was maybe more on the left, would get a say, and they would say something like, oh, but we're killing innocent people. They're like, well, their, brothers and fathers and sons are terrorists. And, if they're coming to kill you, then you got to kill them. And that's just what you got to do. And, that kind of just constant conditioning growing up in that for years made me, I'm just gonna be honest, it made me hate Muslim people, and I was scared of them, and I was terrified. And for that reason, I didn't care that the US was killing them all. And that's, how we get attitudes like, people, I don't know if I ever said anything as callous as this, like when I was in high school or nothing, but Ted Cruz talking about turning Syria or the Middle East into glass. We're talking about genocide. But at the same time, we've been so conditioned into fearing the Muslim people, thinking that anybody who reads the Quran could potentially throw on a backpack full of bombs, show up at your local bus station, and blow themselves up just because your women wear mini skirts and you have the right to vote and drink and do all the great things that there are in life, the hedonism, the real enjoyable parts. And so and I remember the people who did this. I remember Sean Hannity, I remember Matt Boot, I remember Dick Cheney, I remember Donald Rumsfeld, I remember George Bush saying that we couldn't wait for the smoking gun because it could come in the form of a mushroom cloud. And as a little kid trying to deal with like that existential reality that anytime you're anywhere kind of remotely in public, some terrorist is going to set off a nuclear bomb, like kill them all, sure, like that's the way you start to feel, because you can't live in terror and fear your whole life. And if you got to kill people to not live in terror and fear, that's what you got to do. Now, really the people that we just got to get rid of are Sean Hannity and Matt Boot and the rest of the hogs. And then, we could all just go about living normal lives. Although, we have a new thing today that's causing a lot of fear. And I think going to, create the same kind of hatred and hostility towards others that, leads to that kind of dehumanizing thing.
Yeah, I was thinking about that while you were talking, and it made me wonder because when 9/11 happened, I was in basic training, and my kids weren't old enough to be in school. So, did they do things like during the Cold War where they had like drills and stuff like that in schools?
I don't remember anything like that. We did start intruder drills when I was in school, but I think that was more reaction to Columbine,
Yeah.
which was something else that was a way overblown threat that scared all of us as little kids. But it was more like the propaganda of like writing letters to soldiers, care packages to soldiers, just generally like everything we did in not everything, but a lot of what we did in school, especially when I was in elementary school, which was like the 2 or 3 years, probably fourth, fifth, and sixth grade after 9/11. Just so much of what we did was worshiping the state, worshiping our soldiers. And the narrative constantly was, these are the brave men and women that are keeping us safe.
Right.
If it wasn't for them over there doing what they're doing, you and your family could possibly be dead and you would be living in more fear and danger. Nobody would have the luxuries that we have. And so these people need to be worshiped, and everything they're doing for you to be happy.
Right. Well, and we see that same type of hero worship surrounding, nurses and doctors today. I mean, it's a never-ending cycle. Like, it's just something that you start looking at the way that these things, cycle around, and you're like, wait, we did the same shit. Like, this was like just the same old. I grew up in the '90s for the most part, so I don't remember the patriotic, shit being pushed down our throats as kids. I just don't. It was I think we were kind of like the last of the latchkey kids, and it was just kind of like, yeah, you just go do what you do. And I think that's why there's so many people my age in their 40s that are anarchists, because we were always like, yeah, we don't need adults around to like tell us how to behave. If somebody gets smacked in the face with a baseball bat, the dude that hit him in the face with a baseball bat gets his ass kicked by 4 people. I mean, it's just the way it goes. So, that was
Right. I
just
feel like
kinda...
I was like,
Oh no, go ahead.
yeah, I feel like I got to split those generations a little bit. I always remember that pre 2001, really, all the cops in like kind of popular culture were like Chief Wiggum and Officer Barbrady. They were morons who like were unnecessary generally and like kind of came in and screwed stuff up more. And then post, we get all of these like CSI type shows, The Shield, even in cartoons. Look at the difference between like again Chief Wiggum and Swan, super cop who's like kind of one of the guys that's out to do the right thing. And so like I actually kind of remember as a kid being like, why are they like suddenly changing how cops are portrayed in front? And I think it was like after 9/11, just the hero in state worship.
Yeah, no, I remember like 48 Hours, Beverly Hills Cop, Lethal Weapon, and it was always like this justification that the cops are allowed to do wrong for the common good, type shit. Those are the
Yeah.
ones I remember. But so when it comes to what changed your perspective on Afghanistan, what did you run into? Was it the Ron Paul revolution, or were you too young for that? Like, what was it that changed your perspective on foreign policy?
I mean, I'm guessing it was a few things. Part of it was, just getting older, and as you get older, your brain develops, and you're able to think more critically, and just get exposed to like new and more information. Part of it was in high school, I was on the debate team, and so we debated these foreign policy issues. And at the time, I was arguing, the typical mainstream when I believed at the time we need to wage this war perspective.
Right.
But at the same time, like, I'm smart and I remember things. And so when I argued all that stuff in high school, then when I got out of high school and I found Ron Paul in college, I joined the debate team in college and I'm looking at all this stuff again. I'm like, no, they lied about all this. They were talking about it differently like 3 years ago, and now they're talking about, you know, the same things. Where the benchmarks in Iraq were a big, like, kind of eye opener for me. How much I remember those changing. I remember the you know, U.S. intervention in Georgia, and our lack of intervention in Georgia, but how we meddled there and how that all played out. And then I saw the same thing happen in Crimea. And so it wasn't necessarily like Afghanistan that changed my mind. I think it was more like things revolving Iraq, because it was just so much more in the mainstream at that. You know, I mean, like, after the Iraq war started, people really forgot about Afghanistan. Even Obama's surge. I mean, McChrystal brought it back, Petraeus brought it back, but I mean, then as soon as ISIS became a thing, everybody forgets about Afghanistan again, the late Obama years. And so it was more Iraq that changed my mind. But just as I got older and was able to think more critically, I was able to, you think like, okay, these are real ass people in Iraq. Like, this guy is a plumber or a carpenter. Like, he doesn't hate America. He doesn't give a shit about me. Like, I am not on that guy's radar at all, and he should just be allowed to live his life, and I should just be allowed to live my life. And at best, it's, you know, the U.S. empire, and then maybe you know, just a few assholes in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East who are really only the ones trying to kill each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so just starting to realize things on that level, that, you know, that this wasn't like a civilizational war, and like the Arabs and the Muslims were just bound to like get rid of and destroy Americans and all that kind of stuff, right? That, you know, once you realize that, and then I mean, you know, once you start smoking weed and you could think more critically, and like, you know, I think empathize with other people more. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I think that was a part of it for me too. Just like, I'm 30 years old, so the US has essentially been waging war in Iraq my entire life.
Right.
I have to think that if I were born in Iraq instead of America, there's like a third chance that I would be dead. Like, and probably pretty brutally too. Like, not just like maybe like a US airstrike came and killed me in one swoop, but, you know, my leg blew off and I bled out under rumble, or some Shia militia tortured me, or some ISIS guy tortured me, or some US soldier tortured. Like, there's so many ways that, and so many people that the US killed in Iraq over the past 30 years, but particularly, you know, young men who, you know, have opinions. And so again, my guess is that if I were born in Iraq instead of the United States, I would be dead right now. And like, that kind of realization, like, it makes you realize that those are people. And so yeah, just want to stop killing them.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned there about your awareness of these people, and I remember reading Fool's Errand, and I was already pretty non-interventionist by the time I read Fool's Errand. But I remember reading that section in there, and it's the part that stuck with me, I think, more than anything else in the book, was when Scott writes about the Pashtuns thinking that the United States military was the Soviet military, that they had no recognition that the Soviets had ever left Afghanistan, and this was a new war.
That 9/11 happened.
Right. Yeah, they had no idea. And I'm like, wait, what? What? Like, what are we fucking doing? You know, and it's things like that, like these small little tidbits that you pick up on, that you're like, hold on, like, this makes no fucking sense. I can't wrap my mind around it. It just makes no sense to me. And so that was what really pushed me over the edge with going full anti-war, was learning that. And so what exactly is happening today? Like, we've been there for 20 years. We've the United States has done some pretty horrific things in Afghanistan. And as I was telling you before the show, I had heard all this talk about pull out and ending the war, but I never bought it. I was just kind of like, yeah, whatever. they're going to find a way to keep Bagram open. They're going to find a way to keep a presence there, like they have in Japan and Germany. Like they're going to find a way. They're gonna sell it. And I still kind of look at what's being said right now, and I'm kind of leaning towards the fact that they're still trying to sell it. Because I mean, didn't Biden say he was going to send 7,000 more troops or something like that? I'm kind of confused as to what exactly is happening. Did we pull everyone out, and now they're talking about putting 7,000 more troops in? What's going on with that?
Okay, yeah. So I guess maybe the easy place to start is like just real quick. February 2020, Trump signs an agreement with the Taliban, the Doha Accords, where it at least creates a ceasefire agreement between the US and the Taliban. The Afghan government that we back isn't even a party or what, like, to the agreement, right? And so the US even made commitments on their behalf in the agreement, but the agreement said that the Taliban don't attack the United States, and the US agrees to leave by May 1st, and then the Taliban won't let Al-Qaeda come back into the country. General outline. Of course, Trump is an idiot.
I was just going to ask, is this when they were supposed to meet at Camp David? Is this when all that was going on?
It's about 6 months after that, because they were supposed to meet Camp David, I believe, on September 11th. Again, because Trump's a moron, he lets that meeting date be picked to September 11th. But that ends up so the meeting doesn't happen, and then it gets delayed until February, but they finally get it signed. But then, of course, again, Trump just being a political novice term. And so he doesn't get to carry it out. And he had drawn the U.S. down to about 2,400 troops when he left office. Biden comes into office, and he's wishy-washy for the first couple of months. After, I think, March, he lets people know that, look, we're not getting out by May 1st. And then eventually he sets the new deadline date being September 11th, which, again, why the hell would you, that would be the absolute worst day to end the war. Like, I don't want the war to go on till September 30th, but that would be a better date, just because you wouldn't have the, you're surrendering on September 11th. But anyways, after May 1st, the Taliban really start picking up an offensive in the country, although specifically they don't attack any American or foreign targets, and they're not taking like capital cities of the Afghan provinces, basically their states. And so this, goes on throughout the summer. And then around like the second week of August, the Taliban start to take provincial capitals of Afghanistan. And then in response, the U.S. starts to carry out airstrikes, specifically around the city of Lashkar, which is a capital in the southern Taliban stronghold area. And a clinic was hit, killing, I think, over a dozen people in those airstrikes and stuff like that. And so then the Taliban really pick up their offensive. And after a week, I would say they had like 8 or 9, I think, provincial capitals out of 34, and then all but one now have fallen in the past week. And so it was just rapid. Most of them fell without a fight. Scott, I think, Scott Horton, that is, has a really good explanation. It was a coup de main. It wasn't like a coup d'etat. Like, they were all ready to take over power. There was an article, I think it was in USA Today today, that I read, where the Taliban are putting forward that basically what they did is they cut off the borders of between Afghanistan and other countries, and they start to collect the revenue and the tariffs that come in from the borders, and they use that money to start to pay off some tribal leaders. They engaged in mediation with tribal leaders. I think in some cases, the Afghan government commander of a certain area who wouldn't play ball was, taken out back, and then his second in command was willing to play ball, and so now he's just like the Taliban guy there. And so there's a lot of those kind of changes, but they quickly take up until let's say August 15th, they take all the capitals except Kabul and one other, and then they surround Kabul. And on the 15th, the president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, flees the country. There's a report that he took cars and millions of dollars. I don't know if that's true, but it seems to be a common narrative among English speakers in Afghanistan, putting that on Twitter that, you know, he fled with all that money. So when Ghani flees, essentially, that is the end of the Afghan government and the Afghan National Army. And so there's nobody controlling Kabul, and the Taliban just walk right in. Now, according to the Taliban, they had worked out an agreement with Ghani where they were going to allow a transitional government for 2 weeks. I'm not so sure, because today or tomorrow, Thursday, August 19th, I believe the Taliban are declaring their Independence Day. And I saw them put that out like a week ago too. So maybe they had it planned already that they were going to take Kabul by Thursday. But they say that there was a deal with Ghani, and then when he fled, that created a power vacuum in Kabul. And look, I mean, there's just tons of stuff that's owned by the Afghan government that now doesn't exist. And so it's not ridiculous to think that there would be like a risk of looting and stuff like that. And so the Taliban move in, and they say to keep order. It also gives them control of the country. At that time, the U.S. is like basically doing everything they can to get the rest of the stuff out of their embassy. There's, you know, pictures of them helicoptering people, and I'm sure documents and dogs and all kinds of other stuff out of the building, smoke coming out of the building. Now, it's important to note that, like, everybody's saying, you know, this is the fall of Saigon, and I think like the comparisons are, you know, somewhat made sense. But at the same time, as Scott pointed out on my show, he just came out yesterday. He said that, look, you know, in Saigon, they were shelling the embassy. They were fighting off the Viet Cong, and, you know, doing everything they could to get people out. We're here, the Taliban aren't like threatening the U.S., or they're not, you know, shooting or shelling the embassy or anything like that. But nonetheless, I think there is real concern among the U.S. military that could very quickly become the case. There's thousands of Americans that are still today the 18th in Kabul, so certainly there are thousands more on the 15th, and none of them were taken hostage. At least to my knowledge, none of them were taken hostage. I mean, you know, who knows, you know, what's going on in the city of Kabul at night. There could be some crueler things going on that we see during the daytime, but at least there's not like major reports of like Americans like being held captive and killed or anything like that. And so now the Americans have abandoned their embassy. They have like a embassy, quote unquote, functioning at the Kabul airport. That's the only part of Afghanistan that's still under U.S. military control. Now, once this all happened, we got announcements all through last week. They're deploying 1,000 additional troops, 1,000 additional troops, 1,000 additional troops to Afghanistan. I think they're like, if you go by their count, they're up to like 6,000, and this includes, I think, like 3,000 from the 82nd Airborne, 1,000 or so Marines, and then 1,000 or so people from the Montana or Minnesota National Guard. But not all of them are in Afghanistan, at least not yet. As of today, I think I saw 3,500 are in Afghanistan. Although today at a press conference from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Commander of the Joint Chiefs General Milley, they said that it could be like 6,000 by next week. I think that they're planning to have all those troops there. The scene at the airport on the 15th in particularly was where you got all those absolutely insane images. You know, people holding on to planes as they're taking off. You can see, I think, 2 or 3 bodies fall from a plane at like 100 feet. I think 8 to 10 total people were killed at the Kabul airport that day. It's unclear if it was gunfire or trampoline. And in fact, some of the images of what were supposed to be dead bodies, I kind of question if they were. Just didn't look like dead bodies to me, but I'm not there. What do I know? They report 10 dead at the Kabul airport. There's been, since then, I think yesterday, somebody crawled into the landing gear of one of these C-17s and ended up being killed in that. And so there's a lot of desperate actions being taken by the Afghan people. I'm sure kind of fueling the desperation is that there's been a lot of chaos at the Kabul airport, like planes that people have tickets for. There's 300 people on the plane, but 100 seats. There's no pilot and no fuel. There's situations where it seems like people are literally just walking around the tarmac and kind of happen to maybe know a soldier or for whatever reason be able to like climb on into one of these planes, and so they get on and get in. There were scenes, I think, Monday, that would be the 16th, the morning the U.S. Army was evacuating a bunch of dogs, and this got onto Twitter. And so if you're an Afghan, and you see this, you're probably like, what the hell, how your dogs get priority flight before me? And then we end up with that crazy scene of people running down the runway with the C-17. I'm not exactly sure what was on that plane or why the Afghan people were so determined to, it seemed to block it from taking off. Maybe they seemed to think there was more room, or who knows, maybe they loaded up like weapons or cash or something onto that plane and they wanted to get on there. But the US has like plans. I think they're going to try to evacuate 30,000 people or so over the next couple of weeks. I think they only got 5,000 out so far, so I'm not sure how the hell they're going to do that. They don't according to that press conference today that I referenced earlier, the State Department still doesn't have a process in place for how to accept and I guess like document Afghans that don't have a passport. So looking at this, it doesn't even make sense of how, if we plan to get out on the 31st and the Taliban didn't start an advance at all in the country until then, how we were planning to get all these people out of the country. It seems like for the most part the U.S. bureaucracy absolutely botched that part of all of this. And so I don't know if you got any questions, but I think that's about gets us up to date.
Yeah, no, I do. So the people that are trying to get out of Afghanistan, these 30,000, are these like bureaucrats that were working with the United States during this whole process, or who are these people? Like, what do we know like about who's evacuating Afghanistan at this point?
The U.S. seems most concerned about the interpreters because they're the with the U.S. military. My guess is that these are probably the people that have good connections and relationships with the U.S. soldiers and stuff like that. They speak, it seems, from the U.S. to get them, and I think a lot of them are like a part of the 2,000 people that the U.S. already brought to Fort Lee in Virginia. Now there's other people who worked with U.S. NGOs. I'm sure there's like girls that attended like journalism in medical school while the U.S. was in charge, and so they maybe now fear for their lives. Any kind of Afghan like fashion models or pop stars or anything, like popular figures, maybe influencers, those types are maybe concerned. I think there's a lot of people who, like clean the toilets and flip the burgers at the U.S. bases, the guys that, built some of the bases. I talked to Scott Spalding and Danny Sherjan on the show. They're on my show. They're both Afghan war vets, and they both, said that a lot of the people they thought were going to be those types, those who contracted with the U.S. and just to do like random tasks. Also, I read a story about, I think he was a baker who, like, his bakery was the closest to the U.S. embassy, and so he just knew a whole bunch of and was very friendly with the U.S., and he knew that everybody knew him as being friendly with the U.S. diplomats, and so he's concerned about his safety. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure the list of people goes from there to just Afghans who maybe don't want to live under Taliban rule and never really had all that much to do with the U.S., but see this is their opportunity to get out of the country. So I'm sure it's a lot of different people. And I guess there's still a lot of people who are like from other Western NGOs or Americans who are working for NGOs. And then I'm not sure what happened to all of them, but the U.S. also used a lot of third country contractors, particularly Filipinos in Afghanistan, to do some of the more medial work on the bases. Again, some of the cooks and stuff like that, or even engineers. I think there's a team of Filipino engineers that are now stuck in Dubai because they can't get back to the Philippines and nobody else will let them go there either. And so they're stuck at a hotel in Dubai where I don't know if they know anybody or speak the language or anything. But this is kind of the I would say, train wreck of a situation that the U.S. has created, not only with the war, but the way that we're so haphazardly ending it, which shouldn't be surprised. I mean, none of the people in the U.S. empire gave a damn about the lives of any of these Afghans the whole time. And the only reason that they care now is because the scenes make Americans feel bad for the Afghans and want to keep helping them by, in the way that Americans help Afghans is by waging war in their country, according to, the way that we're indoctrinated.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's bombing for humanity. Um, the yeah, it's been something. Like I said, I'm not paying near as much attention as you and Will are, and you have constant access to Will, and are able to talk to him a lot. So I look at a lot of these images and I'm like, okay, how much of this is actually just propaganda? Like, how much of this is just bullshit? You know, as far
I
as,
mean,
as far as I know, the figure we saw hanging out of the landing gear of the C-17 was just some crash test dummy they stuck up in there. I think about these things that way because we've heard it all. We've heard babies on bayonets, and they're throwing babies out of incubators, and WMDs, and this, that, and the other. And then they conflated the Taliban with Al Qaeda for so many years and tried to make us all believe that the Taliban was actually Al Qaeda or part of Al Qaeda or in bed with Al Qaeda in some, obscure way that we could never pinpoint. And so whenever I see like the rifles sitting on shelves in the airport or the people chasing planes, I'm like, are they paying these people? Who are these people? Where do these people come from? There's this really skeptical part of me that, like we were talking about before, I'm very cynical about this whole ordeal because I'm just like, how are they going to try to leverage this for their own benefits?
yeah. Well, like with the people chasing the plane down the runway, they're it doesn't make sense if that plane is loaded up with 600 Afghan refugees, like they have that one picture of,
Mm.
right? That they would be trying to stop a plane full of them because, they'll send another one. And so I'm suspicious that the misleading part of that video is that there's something in that chasing down the runway. I'm skeptical of some of the other images I've seen from Afghanistan about like all the weapons that the Taliban are collecting, especially because sometimes like they'll show like 10 Humvees or something like that. And it's very possible that the Taliban did just get 10 Humvees. It's also possible that this is footage from like 2015, 2016, 2017, when the Taliban sees like Kunduz or Ghazni or any of these other provincial capitals and raided vehicles. Or it could be that while they're actually there, they actually don't work. There's no engine, or there's other missing parts or components. The same thing with the helicopters and some of this other aerial equipment. Just because even if the video is authentic, it doesn't mean it's showing what some people are catastrophizing is showing. Oh my god, all these advanced weapons flying into the hands of the Taliban. I'm sure to some extent it's happening. Also, this seems like one of the absolute most preventable parts of everything that's gone wrong in Afghanistan. Same thing with Iraq. The US, has the ability to carry out airstrikes in Afghanistan. And so I don't know how, like, before the Afghan army evacuates, that there's not some coordination with the US where after the last Afghan army person leaves, we drop an airstrike at least on the row of Humvees that are just sitting in the middle of the base. Right? Like, you could prevent those optics from happening. And in fact, the US did that same thing when it left bases in northeastern Syria and the Russians were moving in. We dropped airstrikes on those bases so that you don't have the bad optics of all that falling in the hands of the Russians.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, it just makes me think because, like, a couple of years ago, driving a truck, the United States government bought back a lot of old trucks, right? And so they bought a lot of old trucks from carriers, and what they would do is they would drill holes in the engine block, So they know how to dismantle these vehicles and make them non-operable. I mean, it's not that difficult. So if U.S. military equipment is being taken by the Taliban and being used by the Taliban, and then it you have to think that's just part of the plan. Like that's just part of what they're doing. They're just handing over this technology, this equipment, because they know how to dismantle this equipment. There's no shortage of instances where they've dismantled equipment.
I guess one of the other options would be is like if the Afghan army commander defects to the Taliban, then maybe in that particular case, the U.S. wouldn't have the forewarning or something like that. But I'm not sure if that's the case in all these situations. And like you're saying, it seems like there's definitely, I mean, hell, you could just like poured a bunch of sugar in the gas tank and let the thing run, let the thing running or something like that, and done enough damage to the engine that I'm sure the Taliban would have never figured out what to do with it.
Right. Yeah.
Or have the time and resources and effort to fix those things anytime soon. So I don't know. I would, as you point out, there's ways that they could disable this equipment if that was really a top concern. And it shows at the very least that it wasn't that big of a concern.
Well, one of the things that makes me sick, man, and that I've been seeing, and I'm sure it makes you sick too because you follow this stuff like more closely than I do, is the amount of people that are suddenly screaming about the oppression of women. And I saw Caitlin Johnston pointed out to a journalist that is suddenly screaming about the oppression of women. Or no, she pointed out to Marianne Williamson, and she was like, this oppression has been going on for the last 20 years too. You didn't care for the last 20 years that these women were being oppressed, but now suddenly you really care. And it's insane to me that that Americans are willing to say, well, we've been bombing this country and we've been at war with this country for 20 years and have not been able to change their culture. But instead of leaving and allowing them to have their culture, we have to stay and continue to fight them until they change their culture. Like that to me is one of the most frustrating parts of all of this.
Yeah. No, it's infuriating, and I haven't like actually stopped being mad about this yet. So if I get a little ranty here and say something crazy, my apologies. But it's absolutely unbelievable that the only time essentially any blue check mark on Twitter cares at all about any life in the Middle East is if the U.S. is looking to end a conflict. The U.S. bombed Doctors Without Borders hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan. And as the patients and the doctors were fleeing, the flight crew in the U.S., I think it was an AC-130, strafed them as they ran and killed more of them, right? There were like little kids in hospital beds that burned alive. And there was not a demand of the Obama administration to really hold anybody accountable after the second time they lied about that story. Completely fell off the radar, completely forgot. Right? Like, did none of their lives matter? Or even worse, like the 30 pine nut tree farmers that got blown off the face of the earth by a U.S. drone 2 years ago. There are men and women Afghans who were just out there trying to, earn a living for their kids and all that. Killed them with the drone strike. Nobody says, oh, the Afghan women, oh, we got to protect the Afghan civilians. This is so horrible. We have to, look at how we're carrying out these drone strikes and hope nothing. They don't care at all. Sell, hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons to Saudi Arabia, and their women are gonna be probably barely better treated than the women under Taliban rule. Nothing. The fact that for the past 20 years it's not like kind of passively, we have been actively backing and protecting and covering for the Afghan warlords that rape little boys as a cultural practice. This is one of the things that's kind of unfair about this is when you talk about women's rights and, oh, women will be shot is the kind of thing that say like, oh, this little boy, I saw him go in and get raped, and when I saw him walk out, his intestines were trailing behind him, right? Like, that's too gruesome to talk about, but because you can't talk about it, then they get just say women's rights and claim the moral high ground, when you're like, hell no, you're defending the fucking child rapist, you son of a bitch, right? Like, there's no attention. And really, what it shows is the only thing that matters at all to these people is the blood of Afghans, because that's the only thing that provides them with any damn value, is being able to kill some of them, right? If there weren't people in Afghanistan to bomb, the US would have no interest in Afghanistan whatsoever. But because we continue dropping bombs on them, it's just such a huge moneymaker. And then, it gives all the cover to do all this other NGO bullshit that did absolutely nothing for the country in 20 years.
Do you think that people labeling this as a Saigon moment, even though it's not parallel, as Scott points out, do you think that the imagery is going to lead to like the type of atmosphere we had in the 70s where in 80s, where people were pretty much against interventions? Do you think that may be the result of all this, and some good may come, at least in the public, subconscious, and their interest in war?
I sure as hell hope so. I mean, the U.S. really needs to catch Vietnam syndrome again, right? We need to have an aversion to international intervention. But that being said, it kind of already exists. 70% of the Americans, and even more of the combat vets from the Afghan and Iraq wars, opposed to things and want them to end. We still can't get them to end, even with the American public generally being against it. I guess the difference between now and then, and it's harder for me to say because I wasn't alive then, and so but even from talking to people at antiwar.com, like Eric Garris, who's been involved in the anti-war movement for decades, it seems that there was a lot more motivation to like be out on the streets and to make an issue about this and to care about it.
Right.
I mean, it's great that people care about Afghanistan this week, but I think chances are that in a couple of weeks, even most libertarians will again, kind of go back to not caring about it. And shit, even among the libertarian community, like 90% of the foreign policy discussions are usually how concerned should we be about China, not how are we gonna end these damn wars. Now I will say I know that Magnus, what Panvidya is putting together his big end the damn wars 9/11 thing,
Right.
and so maybe that will start to like kind of we'll have a pandemic of Afghanistan syndrome and in this country, and have real opposition, real care about war. But I mean, I'm not super optimistic, if I'm going to be honest, that that's going to happen, especially right now with all the COVID stuff. There's too much other stuff to be polarized on. And to be honest, there's a lot of people who, if you don't go agree with them on that, like that's just the most important thing to them is that you're vaccinated.
Yeah, well, it seems to me that it would be easier to maintain support for continuing a war than it would be to garner support for starting a new war. And that 9/11 offered an extenuating circumstance that the politicians and the military industrial complex as a whole don't normally have at their disposal. And in order to enter into another full-blown war of that sort, there would either have to be a major attack on the United States, or there would have to be oh shit, sorry, something popped up from
I see your point, and kind of
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that they would either have to create a false flag. Something just popped up on my screen just out of nowhere, and I'm like, "What the hell just happened?" And so it just kind of caught me off guard. Um, so it was what I was saying. They are either going to have to. There's either going to have to be a major attack, or they're going to have to create a false flag, uh, type of situation in order to create that enthusiastic like wartime like narrative.
The hatred and the fear needed to drum up a war. Yeah.
Exactly.
And no, I think you mean Scott Horton has made this point before. Look, there's Americans, I do think, are generally tired of wars in the Middle East. And we saw in 2013 in Syria that when the war at all was put in front of the American people, it was instantly rejected, right? If there's any knowledge and debate among the American people for war, probably anywhere from Afghanistan to Morocco, and then maybe a little bit Iran, but I think generally speaking, Iran's too much in the Middle East for people to want to get stuck in another Middle Eastern war. And then you have them, really shifting towards great power competition with Russia and China. And I do actually think that the American people are kind of primed up, to take on Russia or China. I think the problem there is that the military understand what it actually means to take on Russia and China. And so you have institutional pushback from going too far. Right. I think, especially after the Trump administration, Americans may actually be ready to try to take on like Russia over Ukraine or China over Taiwan. That said, I don't think any U.S. generals are actually that enthusiastic about doing either of those things. And also, China and Russia are just different players that get to put up different levels of resistance and pushback than Iraq or Saddam Hussein or the Taliban really didn't get any say. Rumsfeld said, we'll meet you in Iraq, or we'll meet you in Baghdad, to the Iraqis, right? Like, they tried to negotiate. The Taliban tried to give up bin Laden, and the U.S. said no. But things are a little bit different when you talk about Russia and China. They're states with nuclear triads and modern militaries, large populations, large economies, and so it is a different game. I'm not sure, like, if they could drum up enough, hatred or humanitarian reasons to go into a country like Nicaragua, Haiti, Cuba, or Venezuela. North Korea has nuclear weapons, so it kind of takes them off the table. But all of that being said, I think a lot of it has switched to the more covert warfare type of stuff that we're seeing in Africa, particularly Somalia, Libya, all over the Sahel region, that's Nigeria and Mali, where there's ongoing insurgencies and civil wars. How the U.S., kind of wormed itself into Syria, even against the will of the American people. We're kind of using Saudi Arabia to fight the war in Yemen. And so, there's a lot of ways for the wars to continue, but certainly I would hope that, like, an American boots on the ground occupation, kind of massive occupation, not like 900 troops like we have in Syria, but something like an Afghan war or an Iraq war. I would hope the American people don't have the taste for it anymore.
Yeah. But again, I mean, you brought up all these, kind of proxy wars that America's involved in. It makes you wonder, like, how much of the American, public kind of sentiment actually matters, because they find ways to worm themselves into Somalia or Yemen or any of these other countries. And then where you're talking about a conflict with Russia or China, but you look at like what was going on in Syria, and there really was this kind of like underlying conflict with Russia, within Syria. And so it makes you wonder or it makes me wonder, at least, if that the future of nuclear powers combating each other are going to come down to these proxies fighting on the nuclear power's behalf, right? You know, like the white helmets versus, you know, Al Qaeda or whatever, you know, kind of deal where like the Chinese are financing and arming one side and America is financing and arming the other side, and they're acting as central bankers more than they're acting as the fighting force, you know, directly. And is that better? Does that create a better situation? A situation in which you the American people are sufficiently off the hook, you know, like or is like I've met people that support the war in Yemen because Shiites, you know, and that's their entire excuse. And I'm like, go back to the 40s and replace the word Shiite with Jew. You know, like it's like you're saying the same thing.
Well, you know, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthi all start with an H in English. And so that obviously means that all three of those groups are proxies of Iran. And anything that happens between any of those states in America, Saudi Arabia, and Israel is just a proxy war with Iran and nothing else. And that's, you know, one of the ways that they get Americans not to care about this. You know, I think in a sense, like it really pisses me off that there is like a real willful ignorance for like Americans of like, you know, where they like, I will have people that say like, I'm against the wars, but I'm concerned about healthcare. And so I gotta vote for Biden. It's like, you're justifying killing millions of people in the Middle East, but you're going to vote for Joe Biden because you want good health care. And so people don't learn about foreign policy because I don't think they could like, I think the cognitive dissonance is what they like want to maintain, right? Like where you're realistically going to have to give up like voting for your candidate of choice who's going to do what you one on the border or on healthcare or gun control or whatever if you want to end the wars. And just, you know, people aren't willing to do that, and so they don't even confront the war issue. I think because they know if they do it enough, then they won't have a choice but to like just revolve their lives around it. You know, like you can only know this so much and know how much horrible stuff the U.S. government is doing, and still vote for a Republican or a Democrat who, you know, endorse those wars.
Right. This is kind of a deeper like problem though, because they say they're voting for healthcare, they say they're voting for the border, or they say they're voting for whatever domestic policy, but that's not what they're voting for. They're voting for more wealth for themselves, right? I mean, that's ultimately what it boils down to. That they're going to benefit financially from this domestic policy, in that they're saying that their financial well-being is more important than being humane to people living in third world countries across the globe. That's ultimately like what the argument boils down to.
I mean, I think that's a big part of it. Now, what they do is they like, you know, trick themselves by saying it's not my healthcare, it's all the other people's healthcare that, you know, we gotta vote for. And of course, you know, they're all getting duped on all this shit anyways. It's not actually making them wealthier for the most part. I mean, geez, so I don't know. I don't want to get your. No, I won't say because I don't want to get your show in trouble. But
you can get my show in trouble.
Kind of look at what's going on right now.
Crazy shit on here.
Okay, all right, fine. You definitely don't want government-run healthcare. You definitely don't want the government-run healthcare because those are going to be the first people that either don't get healthcare or have to take the vaccine.
Right. Yeah. No, you're right, and that was one of my concerns about being a trucker was how long before, because I don't think people understand that the trucking industry is regulated by the federal government. Like everything within trucking is regulated by the federal government.
Heavily regulated.
I can't do anything. Like even if I live in, like, let's say I live in a state that has legalized marijuana, I'm still subject to federal government drug testings. Yeah, right. So like everything is operated when it comes to trucking by the federal government. And so, like, one of my main concerns and why I came local and I was willing to take less money is because my concern that they were going to try to force me to get a vaccine in order to be able to cross state lines, right? And so, because we got to get a medical card every 2 years, I have to go get a medical exam every 2 years to ensure that I'm medically fit to drive a truck. So, what's to stop them from making a mandatory vaccine part of that medical examination, right? And so that was part of my reasoning for coming local and working local, because I'm like, this company that I'm working for now is not going to, adhere to that easily. They pretty much only operate in Texas. We do go to Louisiana sometimes, but for the most part, they're just operating in Texas. So even though I'm a truck driver, they're bound by the Texas laws of the oil field industry, which is completely different than over the road laws. So whenever I'm looking
Okay.
at what's going on, in foreign policy and what the federal government's doing in foreign policy, I'm sitting there saying, well, like, you're bargaining that this federal government domestically is going to act on your benefit, and you're trading millions of lives for potential benefits.
Yeah, people continue to be willing, are just that's how they operate. Foreign policies at the bottom of their concern. And in fact, there's almost like sometime, well, especially when you talk to like anybody on like the general, not like the good left, but like the just general left, whenever you bring up foreign policy, they go, what aboutism on you? Right? They're like, oh no, you're not willing to take on the big problems and address the major issues, right? Like, no matter how big the white supremacist problem in America is, and I'm not saying that like there's not a single non white supremacist in the country, I promise you the US killed more people in Iraq than they'll ever kill in this country.
Right.
And so, if you're trying to care about people, like, the body count is a lot higher over there. Right. And I mean, especially when you look at like how destructive this all was. This was 20 years wasted in Afghanistan. They've been parading around these past couple of weeks like, oh no, democracy is gone in Afghanistan. Do you know what percentage of eligible voters voted in the last election? 20%. 20% of eligible voters voted in the last election. The second person, the guy who won, claimed to have won, was Ashraf Ghani. Abdullah, by the official count, came in second. Both men contested the election. It took like 9 months to declare a winner. And after Ghani was declared the winner, Abdullah held a swearing-in ceremony at the same time. You could see on Afghan TV dual like presidential swearing-in ceremonies at the same time, right? And we're calling this a successful democracy. And it wasn't even like the Abdullah just got ignored. He ended up like negotiating himself a place in the government. So this wasn't a democracy. What I mean? It was just a U.S. imposed train wreck on Afghanistan. Right. I don't even think people in like the Taliban areas and the rural areas of the country actually voted in the last election. Hundreds of people got killed in the lead up to the election. The Taliban were attacking the voting sites and the people going around trying to get people to vote. And then on election day, there were attacks at various sites, trying to deter people from voting this candidate or the other. We, inflicted more violence on the country, the election, than just if Ghani had kept his presidential role without an election happening. There wasn't a democratic state. There wasn't order. It was just a corrupt state. I mean, they just stole all the money. That's all that happened is the elites in the United States who were able to provide some of the contracting services and equipment and got the contracts to run these NGOs to get 50 women trained in journalism that apparently they're not going to do their job in the future now that the Taliban are in charge and all this other crazy shit that they did. All that money was completely wasted, and most of it went to just the most corrupt people in Afghanistan. And if you think about it, that sets their society back so much further because now these people are the rich ones who have influence and leadership in the country, are the ones that we propped up and enriched all the past years, and then the Taliban for opposing them. And so it's made it so that even worse actors are probably coming to charge in Afghanistan now. And I mean, Afghan children end up being like stunted in some way because of like nutritional issues. Like, we know what this does like long term. Like if you're malnourished as a child, chances are not guaranteed, but chances are your brain's not going to develop as well, so you're more likely to have a variety of mental illnesses, depression, bipolar, stuff like that, more severe psychosis. You're more likely to have like a lower IQ, to be illiterate. Then this is more likely to engage in violence in the home, violence against the children. We're just starting all these cycles of violence in all these countries, just completely wrecking the way of life. This is one of the things that really changed my mind about foreign policy. I think in 2011 there was a psychiatrist who was doing a study in rural Yemen, and he published this in the Rolling Stone. He said like 95% of the children that he saw had PTSD from the drones. The girls were all scared all the time. The boys, if he had like the AC or the office and the fan on, the buzzing reminds them of the drones and causes them to act irrationally angry and violent. Right? Like we're conditioning the Yemeni children from the time they're born with our fucking drones to be terrified of that noise, and to add it just the way cortisol works in the developing brain, it just causes all the pathways to go towards violence, fight or flight mechanism, and it's just wrecking entire societies to enrich Lockheed Martin.
Right. Well, I wonder, like, I've never looked in how much of the history of Afghanistan or the Middle East in general have you looked into? Is that something that you really like delved into?
I mean, I've tried to. Obviously, I know like the most about the terror wars that like I really cover. I have read like other books and like watch stuff, but particularly Andrew Bacevich's book, War in the Middle East, and Eric Margulis's War at the Top of the World are books that like kind of go over the historical parts of the wars, either in Afghanistan or the Middle East in general. For Syria, Reese Erlitz's Inside Syria is absolutely fantastic, going back decades, centuries even.
One of the questions I've often wondered is how much of all this conflict that is constantly taking place in the Middle East between these countries is because of the West moving in there and drawing the borders and interrupting natural communities that have already established, and dividing these communities and creating, this hostility within newly formed communities.
Right. Well, you do kind of this crazy thing where you could imagine what kind of chaos this would cause in your town, right? If you just kind of went and drew a circle around random neighborhoods or something, and we're like, okay, now everybody in this neighborhood is going to vote on who's in charge, and that person is going to, control 20% of the money in the breakout. And if you look at the Middle East, how like the Kurdish ethnic group is, I think, like bisected or whatever, that would be into 5 or 6 different states.
Right.
The Pashtuns are split between Afghanistan and Pakistan. They're 40% of the Afghan population. They're, I forget what percent, I think maybe a majority of the Pakistan population. Pakistan, India have like Hindu and Muslim minorities in each of those countries. Iraq is, Shia, Sunni, and Kurdish British and I believe intentionally the line between Iraq and Syria was drawn to split the Sunnis and the Kurds and divide up those ethnic groups. Same thing with Lebanon; it's divided mainly between the Christians, the Shia, and the Sunni. And so you see this like all over the Middle East, and a lot of it I think is the way the lines were drawn. Now I'm sure some people will point out that there's I don't know, I don't want to be like too negative about, but something that's kind of inherent in humans that forms these governments that go to war with each other. I don't think like you could look at the Middle East and be like, oh, this is a historic region of peace before Western colonization, something like you
Oh
might
no, I mean you
hear
had the
a
Ottoman
real leftist say or
Empire and
something.
stuff. Yeah.
Right. In the Al Saud family, conquered part of the Middle East and was absolutely brutal. And going all the way back to the Mongols who rolled through like this. This isn't like a particularly peaceful area of the world, or I'm not trying to portray it that way or anything. Right. Just that it does seem like the particular way that all these lines were drawn, not only in the Middle East but also in Africa. Essentially, if you're going to force all these countries are to comply with like the general rule of having a state, and that state having representation in the world, and through that they get tons of money through the IMF and all that. So whoever is recognized as the controller of all these states has incredible amounts of power, then you're kind of like dooming all these areas to perpetual conflicts, especially by now, because everybody has legitimate grievances, right? I'm sure you could go to Afghanistan and you could talk to Hazara, who his grandpa was tortured to death by a Taliban Pashtun. But then you could talk to a Pashtun whose three brothers were killed in a massacre by some Tajik warlord, and all these kind of crazy issues. And the Taliban are more disrespectful towards women, but the warlords are more terrible to children. And how do you balance that out, and who's more corrupt and all that? And it's a giant mess that's been created.
Right. Yeah.
Anarchy, man.
Yeah. These governments in the Middle East definitely show that government is worse than anarchy. So, but hey, we've been going over.
I mean, it's hard to, yeah.
Oh no, go ahead and finish your thought.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say we're gonna.
Oh, I was just gonna say,
that delay.
I was gonna add that it's hard to like imagine like in some particular states like Yemen, Afghanistan, or Iraq. Look at Somalia after like essentially the government went away and the Islamic Courts Union came and kind of had this more kind of rule code thing. I mean, that's as peaceful as that state's been in the past 3 decades. And so it's not necessarily that like having no government's going to create a panacea and suddenly there's going to be like Dubai springing up in Afghanistan or something like that. But at the same time, you could imagine that maybe less people would have died, and local communities would have figured out how to relate to the communities and trade to the communities next to them and just work out their local power sharing agreements and stuff like that. Not that there's never going to be conflict, but that when things balance out and don't have a major it's like the US injecting $1 billion into some randoms, and that's just what keeps happening.
Yeah. And I don't know. I don't know what makes people think that like involving themselves in these countries' internal politics, especially on a military front, is going to make a big difference in these countries, or going to create peace in these countries. I guess, oh, well, if they have a united front against an external invader, then yeah, okay, they'll fight together to fight off that external invader. But eventually, they're going to turn back into these tribal conflicts that have been there for thousands of years. And this is something that the West needs to, get out of and stop trying to force their idea of what the politics should be or what the borders should be, because that seems to not solve the problem. So I mean, I don't know if like ripping the Band-Aid off is obviously going to create problems in the immediate future, but I think that it at least gives the people a chance to solve their problems in the long run. And by intervening militarily, you're not allowing people the opportunity to solve their problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
It reminds me of the war on drugs, and kind of like what Portugal did by legalizing everything, decriminalizing everything, and how initially when it happened, they had more addiction rates, they had more homicide, they had more turmoil and crime. But after like 5 years, like they had cut in half the amount of addiction and crime. And so it's like, yeah, when you rip that Band-Aid off, the initial reaction is negative. But if you just give it a minute, let it settle, let all this water settle, and you'll see that the sea's calm eventually.
Yeah.
So much of the focus of my podcast is to point out abuses of power and how bad things have gotten and the direction in which we're heading as a society. And it can be a real black pill. I've partnered up with Richard Grove to offer my listeners an opportunity to sign up to his Autonomy Course. The Autonomy Course is designed for people looking for solutions, people that want to shape their own future, people that are not willing to be at the behest of large corporations or the United States government or the banking system. The Autonomy Course is designed for those of you who wish to have complete control of the reins of your life, who are looking to be successful, to thrive and not just survive, to provide for your family by utilizing your existing skills and learning how to market and sell those skills in order to be your own boss, or learn new skills in order to leverage that into a new career opportunity. So if there's a job out there you've been trying to get or you've been wishing you could get, but you just don't have the skills for it, the Autonomy Course is the place for you to start, to learn how to land that position, to learn how to market yourself better, to gain confidence, and to be surrounded by a community of like-minded people that will encourage you and help you along the way. So use my affiliate links and go check out the Autonomy Course. It could be right for you.
Yeah, same thing with if the U.S., let's say tomorrow the Fed just disbanded, it would probably be bad a little bit,
Yeah.
There would be some really crazy things happening in the markets. People who need loans wouldn't be able to get them, and all kinds of other just insane things going on. But eventually, when all the correction happened, then the economy that gets built from there is going to be a lot stronger. In years from now, we're several times wealthier than we are now. Of course, we got trillions of dollars in war debt from Afghanistan that we're going to be paying off years into the future. So, yeah. Anyways,
I'm interested in how that's going to work out, but that's a completely another conversation. So,
yep.
Well, plug away, man. Like, I really enjoyed this conversation. It was a lot of fun. I could talk to you for hours, and I'm tired and hungry, and I'm like, okay, like it's been over an hour now.
Oh no, for sure. I definitely get it. I usually wait to eat dinner till after I podcast, because I feel like I got a little bit more energy before I eat, and so usually by the end of my show, I'm sweating, I'm tired, and I'm hungry. And no, Tommy, I appreciate you letting me come on the show so much, man. And I really enjoyed it. For, I guess, Libertarian Institute is the main place to go, which I'm sure if they're listening to your show, they know about. The all podcast feed there is me, you, Pat McFarlane of Liberty Weekly, Keith Knight of Don't Tread on Anyone, Pete Quinones, Free Man Beyond the Wall, and Sky Horton Show. So that's a hell of a podcast lineup if you can't get enough libertarian stuff to listen to.
Right.
Antiwar.com. I'm the opinion editor. So for my stuff, check out the Viewpoints every day. Fund drive going on there right now. So if you want to help us end the wars, donate some money. And Conflicts of Interest is the show I host with Will Porter 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I try to have a lot of guests on, but typically we're always talking about news and current events, typically war stuff, but we also definitely have been covering COVID, the COVID state. We talk about policing stuff or ridiculous amounts of government spending. Trillions of dollars, it gets our attention.
Yes, and we will put links. I will put links. I have started putting links. I have gotten better about putting links. I was horrible about that for the first 2 years, but I will do that. So this was awesome, man.
I appreciate it.
All right, dude. I'm gonna stop the
All right.
Said you're just a slave. All your good intentions took you to your grave. Your pride is how they killed you. With the flag you waved just like a fool. They promised you a mountain, gifted you a stone. They demanded that you throw it into your neighbor's home and then seize all that they worked for and give it to the throne just like a tool. Well, as we all just stand in line and glorify new ways of being cruel, it seems to me humanity is not something that they're teaching us in school. They dumbs down all around propaganda, their pollution. They set a cage up on the stage, a facade for all solution. They build a wall, block them all from this mental institution. It's insane. Now they're writing their own rule books and they're crossing all their T's. They're fashioning their people to all wear beggars' knees. If you want a clean drink of water, well, you must say pretty please. It's all a game. As we all just stand in line and justify these crimes done in our names, it seems to me authority and tyranny are both one and the same. Well, it's time to change the channel. It's time to set things right. Make them all rot with fear in their beds at night. Devour all their worthless souls and sacrificial right, just like we should. Of those who are to blame, and we'll stack them up like cordwood, watch them sizzle on the flames for good. Well, as we all just stand in line waiting for some kind of Robin Hood, our liberty will never be until our right to freedom is understood. Thank you.